The dim glow of my laptop screen was my only companion in the empty apartment, casting long shadows that danced mockingly across the walls as I typed another scathing debunking of some fool's ghost story, unaware that real darkness was already creeping in from the edges of my frayed sanity. Silence pressed in like an unwelcome guest, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the occasional creak of settling floorboards, which I dismissed as the building's age. Nights like this blurred together, my world reduced to the cold logic of facts and figures, a fortress against the chaos of buried emotions after everything fell apart. Yet, in the quiet hours, when sleep evaded me, fragmented dreams clawed at my mind, visions of indistinct shapes lurking in forgotten places, murmurs echoing too close to waking thoughts, dismissed as exhaustion. I rubbed my eyes, the weight of isolation settling heavier, a subtle chill threading through the room as if the air itself held its breath, waiting. Another late-night scroll through my inbox yielded the usual spam and student queries, but one subject line caught my eye. Unlocking the lost rites of pre-Sumerian echoes. The sender was anonymous, with no attachments, just a terse invitation to a private lecture in the old city library's basement. I smirked. It was prime material for my next debunking article. As a professor of anthropology specializing in cultural myths and illusions, I'd built my career exposing the pseudoscience behind ancient rituals and occult nonsense. But after the divorce left me rattling around an empty apartment, and that grant denial stalled my book on folklore fallacies, anything sparking inspiration felt like a lifeline. I dismissed the prickling unease at my neck as caffeine jitters, those recurring nightmares of shadowy ruins and yawning voids merely stress from isolation. The dreams had plagued me for weeks, vast, crumbling structures where unseen eyes watched from the darkness, their gaze boring into my soul. I shook it off, replying with casual acceptance. What harm could a little fieldwork do? The next evening, I descended the creaking wooden stairs into the dimly lit basement of the library, the air thick with dust motes dancing in the faint glow of flickering fluorescent bulbs and the musty scent of aged books stacked in forgotten corners. The space felt like a tomb, its walls lined with shelves sagging under the weight of yellowed volumes, their spines cracked and faded. A small circle of chairs stood in the center, illuminated by a single overhead lamp that cast long, wavering shadows. George Castor greeted me at the bottom, a tall man in his 50s with piercing gray eyes that absorbed light rather than reflected it, and a voice like polished gravel scraping against stone. He wore a tailored black suit that hung loosely on his gaunt frame, and his handshake was firm, almost painfully so. "Welcome, Dr. Turner. We've followed your work on folklore fallacies with great interest. Perhaps tonight you'll see the truths beneath the veils of skepticism." His smile didn't reach his eyes, and there was something predatory in the way he studied me, as if assessing a specimen. The group was an eclectic mix. Artists with paint-stained fingers, seekers with wide-eyed fervor, intellectuals nursing dog-eared notebooks. Among them was Leah, a painter in her late 20s, her arms covered in vibrant tattoos of swirling abstract designs that seemed to shift when I glanced away. She had a hungry gaze, like someone starving for inspiration, her dark hair falling in wild curls around a face lit with quiet intensity. George began the lecture, his voice weaving through the air like smoke, speaking of forbidden texts he'd unearthed in forgotten archaeological digs, scrolls predating Sumerian civilization, etched with rites that promised transcendence beyond the mortal coil. He described them as echoes from a primordial void, entities that had spoken to humanity's earliest ancestors, offering power in exchange for something unspoken. The group nodded knowingly, their eyes locked on him with a devotion that made my skin crawl. To demonstrate, George led a simple chant, the words rolling off his tongue in a language that sounded like wind through cracked bones. One member, a middle-aged woman with hollow cheeks, slipped into a trance immediately, her body rigid as she muttered in a guttural tongue that resounded unnaturally off the walls. Her eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and for a moment I swore I saw shadows flickering in the room's corners, as if the chant had stirred something dormant. I rationalized it as mass hypnosis, a psychological trick amplified by the group's collective belief. But the secrecy unnerved me, the way they locked eyes, sharing a forbidden bond that excluded outsiders like me. As the session ended, Leah approached, her smile warm but edged with something sharper.
Fascinating, isn't it? George has a way of making the impossible feel real.
I nodded, but inside doubt flickered. This could be the hook for my article, a modern cult preying on the disillusioned. Intrigued despite myself, I returned a week later for their first proper ritual, held in an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. The building loomed like a skeletal giant under the moonless sky, its rusted doors creaking open to reveal a cavernous interior lit by flickering candles arranged in intricate patterns on the cracked concrete floor. The air hung heavy with scents of decay and rust, mingled with something sweeter, more insidious. In the center, George had placed obsidian stones etched with symbols that seemed to twist under my gaze, spirals and jagged lines pulsing with an inner life. Incense burned in brass censers, releasing plumes of acrid smoke that choked my throat and made my eyes water. The group formed a circle, their faces pale masks in the candlelight, and George began the chants, invoking echoes from the void, with a fervor that sent chills racing down my spine. I observed from the edge, notebook in hand, jotting details for my debunking piece. As voices rose in unison, a strange energy hummed through the air, vibrating in my chest like a distant drum. Faces contorted in ecstasy or agony, I couldn't tell which, and for a split second, a presence brushed my mind, cold and probing. I dismissed it as group dynamics, the power of suggestion in a charged atmosphere. Afterward, Leah invited me for coffee at a nearby dingy all-night diner. We bonded over steaming mugs, her enthusiasm easing my lonely nights. She described how the rites had unlocked new visions for her art, her eyes alight with a manic gleam.
"It's like the shadows are speaking to me now,"
she said, laughing softly. But when she showed me photos of her latest paintings on her phone, my stomach twisted. Twisted forms writhed on the canvases, shadows bleeding into flesh, humanoid figures with elongated limbs and voids for faces. They weren't just abstract. They felt alive, judgmental. Other members fidgeted in the diner booths, staring into dark corners as if something watched back, their murmurs laced with paranoia. The pool was undeniable, and soon we delved deeper, gathering at a remote forest cabin miles from the city. The drive there was interminable, winding through dense woods where trees leaned in, branches scratching the car like skeletal fingers. The cabin was dilapidated, its wooden walls warped by time and weather, the air inside thick with pine and damp earth. Invocations grew fervent under George's guidance. The group huddled around a fire pit where flames danced unnaturally high, casting grotesque shadows that twisted on the walls. "Hungry voids seek hosts," George intoned, his voice resounding as if from a great depth. Leah convulsed during the rite, her body arching backward, eyes glazing over as she spoke of invasions, entities slipping through cracks in reality, hungry for flesh and mind. I watched in horrified fascination, my irrational mind screaming that it was a seizure or performance. But then I glimpsed it. Tendrils in the mirrors scattered around the cabin, writhing like solid smoke, reaching toward me. I blinked, and they vanished. Blamed on exhaustion from sleepless nights haunted by escalating nightmares, now featuring voices murmuring my name in forgotten languages. Back in my apartment, I delved into the weathered tomes George had lent me. They brimmed with cryptic warnings, humans as vessels for malevolent beings from beyond the stars, rites that opened doors best left sealed. Doubt crept in like fog as my journal filled with frantic questions. Were these just elaborate metaphors for psychological breakdowns, or something more? The nightmares intensified, now vivid with sensations, cold touches on my skin, murmurs promising power if I just let go. Transformations accelerated among the group, subtle at first, but soon undeniable. The burly businessman named Victor hulked with unnatural strength during one session, lifting a heavy altar stone single-handedly, his veins bulging like roots under his skin. His eyes gleamed with feral light, and his laugh resounded too deeply, as if multiple voices joined in. The elderly scholar, Professor Hale, began to change as well, his skin peeled like old parchment, revealing raw, glistening layers beneath that pulsed with an inner rhythm. Apparitions manifested in our meetings, shadowy forms that hurled books from shelves and snuffed out candles in unison, inducing a paralysis that gripped us all, our bodies frozen while our minds screamed. One botched ritual in the warehouse birthed horror incarnate, Black, oily tendrils erupted from a member's flesh, writhing like living vines. They possessed nearby wildlife, rats and stray cats that lunged at us with glowing eyes, their movements jerky and unnatural, driven by an alien will. We fled in chaos, the member's screams resounding behind us as the tendrils consumed him from within. The madness spilled into the city. Disappearances mounted. Group members vanished overnight, only to be found days later, bodies twisted into impossible shapes, limbs elongated like pulled taffy. Buildings distorted subtly, walls bulging as if breathing, windows reflecting scenes from other worlds. I felt it inside me now. Violent thoughts not my own, urges to lash out at strangers on the street, to rend and tear. In the mirror, my reflection sometimes lagged, its eyes holding a darkness that wasn't mine. Panic set in. I couldn't sleep without barricading the doors, convinced something was scratching at the windows. Desperate, I confided in Savannah, a pragmatic biologist in the group I'd befriended during our early meetings. She had sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor, her lab coat often dusted with remnants of her daytime experiments. We met in a secluded park at dawn, poring over ancient lore she'd traced to prehistoric cults, cave paintings depicting starborn entities descending upon early humans, merging with them in symbiotic horror. "These aren't myths," she murmured, her voice trembling. "George has awakened something real, something that feeds on our essence." George himself confessed during a tense confrontation in the library basement, his facade cracking. "Immortality," he admitted, his eyes wild. "The echoes promise it, but control is slipping. They hunger more than I anticipated." His hands shook as he spoke, revealing the toll, the faint tracings of shadows under his skin like veins of darkness. We gathered for the ultimate ritual in ancient chambers beneath the city, reached via a hidden sewer entrance leading to a labyrinth of dripping stone tunnels. The air was fetid, laced with the scent of blood and earth. The walls, carved with symbols matching those on George's stones, glowed faintly in the torchlight. As the chants peaked, possessions erupted, limbs elongating with sickening cracks, voices multiplying into choruses of agony, walls bleeding viscous fluid that pooled at our feet. I fought visions of my failures, the divorce replaying in excruciating detail, my ex-wife's face morphing into a screaming void, the grant denial symbolizing my crumbling life. An entity clawed at my mind, promising to fill the emptiness if I surrendered, its presence a cold weight pressing on my thoughts. Betrayal struck like a thunderclap. George targeted me as the perfect vessel, his piercing eyes locking onto mine as he chanted my name into the right. "Your skepticism makes you strong," he snarled, "a worthy host for the greatest echo." Chaos reigned, group members turning on each other, bodies contorting into abominations. With Savannah at my side, we sabotaged the artifacts, smashing obsidian stones and dousing the incense with water from a nearby seep. The chamber plunged into darkness, screams resounding as entities recoiled. In the frenzy, I found Leah, her form twisted beyond recognition, skin stretched taut over elongated bones, eyes like voids of swirling darkness. She pleaded in a voice not her own, begging for release. Tears blurring my vision, I let her go with a shard of obsidian, her final gasp shattering my skepticism into irreparable fragments. Blood warm on my hands, we fled through warped streets where buildings leaned at impossible angles, shadows pursuing us like living darkness. But Savannah, she was partially possessed, the entity having taken root in her during the escape. Her eyes flickered with unnatural light, her movements jerky as she begged for release, murmuring that it was growing stronger.
"End it, please,"
she gasped, clutching my arm with fingers that felt too cold, too elongated. I couldn't do it. Not again. I left her in an alley, her cries haunting me as I ran, guilt gnawing like acid in my gut. She was gone by morning. Another disappearance in the growing tally. In seclusion, I've holed up in a safe house on the city's edge, a nondescript cabin warded with symbols etched into doors and windows, gleaned from George's texts. Shadows shift unnaturally here, corners darkening even in daylight, while murmurs ride the wind from lingering entities that recognize me as one who resisted. I've pieced together a counter-ritual from fragments of lore, a binding chant to seal the voids once more. I must return to those ancient chambers and confront the heart of the horror. But the stirring inside waits, a seed of darkness planted deep in my psyche, blooming with every nightmare. Violent urges swell at odd moments, my reflection smirking back with eyes not my own. How long before it consumes me? The counter-ritual is my last hope, but doubt murmurs that it's already too late. The echoes have claimed their host. The nightmares have evolved, no longer mere visions, but immersive torments. Last night I dreamed of the warehouse again, but this time the obsidian stones weren't inert. They hummed with a frequency that resonated in my bones, drawing me closer. In the dream I reached out, and the stone's surface rippled like water, a tendril emerging to wrap around my wrist, cold and insistent. I woke sweating, my arm marked with faint bruises shaped like fingerprints, not mine. The safe house feels less secure with each passing hour. Objects move when I'm not looking. A chair scrapes across the floor. A book opens to a page of warnings I hadn't marked. I've taken to sleeping with a knife under my pillow, but I fear it's not for protection from outside threats. Leah's face haunts me most. In quiet moments, I replay that final act of mercy, her twisted body slumping, the light fading from those void-like eyes. Was it truly mercy, or did I doom her to eternal limbo, her essence absorbed into the echoes? Savannah's pleas resound too, a chorus of regret drowning out reason. I abandoned her to the entity gnawing at her soul. What kind of man does that make me? The anthropologist who sought truth, now fleeing from it. George's confession replays in my mind like a looped recording. Immortality, he said, but at what cost? His eyes, once piercing, had dulled to haunted pits, as if the echoes had already hollowed him out. I wonder if he's still out there, a puppet dancing on strings of shadow, or if he's become one with the void. The lore Savannah and I uncovered speaks of cycles, entities that rise and fall with the stars, using humans as bridges to our world. Pre-Sumerian, yes, but older still, from epochs where life was but a murmur in the cosmic dark. I've meticulously prepared the counter-ritual. It demands returning to the chambers, reassembling artifacts in reverse order, and inverting chance to repel rather than invite. Yet the stirring within me grows bolder. Last evening, while practicing the words, my voice cracked. For a heartbeat, it wasn't mine, a deeper timbre overlaying my own, mocking the syllables. Violent thoughts intrude, visions of returning not to seal, but to widen the opening, letting echoes flood the world. I fight them, but exhaustion erodes my resolve. The safe-house walls seem thinner now, with shadows pooling like oil under the doors. Outside, the city murmurs of more anomalies, streets that loop endlessly, people vanishing mid-conversation, their screams resounding from storm drains. The news calls it mass hysteria, but I know better. The entities recognize me, marking me as a threat or a prize. Tonight I must return. The counter-ritual is ready, scrawled in my journal with trembling hands. But as I stare at the pages, the writing shifts, forming new symbols that beckon surrender. The stirring inside, it's not just waiting, it's awakening. And in the quiet of this safe house, I fear the greatest horror is that I've already lost. I returned to the underground chamber under cover of night, the sewer entrance yawning like a maw into oblivion. The air was thicker than before, heavy with the residue of blood and echoes of screams. The walls scarred with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Armed with counter-symbols etched onto makeshift talismans and bundles of herbs whose scents pierced the fetid stench, I moved like a shadow, my footsteps resounding in the dripping tunnels. George waited at the heart of it all, no longer the charismatic historian, but a grotesque vessel, his body bloated and veined with writhing darkness, eyes like bottomless pits that pulled at my soul.
"You've come to join us, Turner,"
he rasped, his voice a chorus of overlapping murmurs.
"To become eternal."
It was a battle not of fists, but of will, me against the entity puppeteering him, hurling inverted chants that clashed with his invocations like thunder. Visions assaulted me, Leah's twisted pleas, Savannah's abandoned cries, my own failures replaying in a torment meant to break me. But I held firm, drawing on the rational core I'd once wielded as a weapon, now fused with the harrowing truths I'd uncovered. I shattered the central artifact, a pulsing obsidian core, and recited the reversal rite, the words burning my throat as they redirected the forces back through their gateways. The chamber convulsed, walls cracking, shadows recoiling like scorched tendrils, and George crumpled, the entity fleeing his husk with a final, deafening wail. Most of the horrors withdrew, sucked into the void, leaving behind a silence that rang with fragile victory. Yet, I knew it wasn't absolute. Scattered possessions lingered in the world, preying on the vulnerable, waiting for weakness. Back in my empty apartment, the dim glow of my laptop screen serves as my vigilant sentinel once more, but no longer for debunking fool's tales. The shadows on the walls still dance, and I watch them closely, heeding anonymous warnings in online forums about signs of resurgence, subtle trances, murmurs in the dark. I've traded isolation for perpetual vigil, the losses of Leah and Savannah etched into my soul like scars, fueling my silent vow to contain any flicker of the echoes before they spread. The world spins on, oblivious, but I know better. The rational skeptic is gone, replaced by a guardian haunted by what he's unleashed and quelled. Yet, in the quiet hours, as sleep evades me, a faint stirring resounds within, a murmur from the void, reminding me that the real darkness never fully retreats. It only waits, creeping at the edges of my frayed sanity, ready to claim its host if I falter.
Hey guys, it's Malice here. I really appreciate you sticking around until the end of the story. I'm a one-man operation and trying my best to grow, so if you like what you just heard, please leave me a like. Subscribe if you want to hear more, and please send me any reading requests you might have. I'm always struggling to find new content. Thanks again, and stay scared.